Alright guys, and welcome to another episode of Robostoph's Fireside Book Chat. This is just a cozy book discussion series where we talk about books next to a fire. Today we're going to be talking about the most disturbing book that I've ever read, and the only one I can think of that has moved me to tears, which is Dalton Trumbo's Johnny's Got His Gun. This is a book that was released sort of right in the beginning phases of World War II, but it takes place during World War I. A quick summary is that this guy named Joe gets shipped off to war and almost immediately gets hit by a mortar shell. And he wakes up in the hospital and finds out he doesn't have arms, legs, no mouth, no eyes, ears, or nose even. But his brain still functions. So he's basically trapped in his own body with no way to communicate. And this book is his journey, more or less, of how he overcomes this challenge to a degree. So we're going to discuss the book itself, a little bit of its backstory, and its impact on me personally. A little bit of backstory. This book came out right around the beginning phases of World War II, and it is largely seen as being kind of like anti-war propaganda. Dalton Trumbo, the author, was a known member of the Communist Party, living here in the States. He's got a Hollywood profile. He's a writer in Hollywood. He gets later blacklisted and all these things for his political views. Not unlike the Oppenheimer story, right? But as far as this book goes, at no point did I feel like I was reading some sort of propaganda piece or being motivated to be some sort of hippie liberal or something. Anyway, with that being said, there's an online rumor, which I cannot substantiate the source, so take that at face value, that this book was inspired by the Prince of Wales visiting Canadian soldiers after World War I, which really did happen. That part I could find, but what I couldn't find is allegedly he meets a soldier that very much meets the description of the one from this book. I can find no such instance of that. I didn't dig very deep, so if you're a history nut, maybe you can provide me with the source on that one. But that being said, supposedly that was the author's inspiration for this story. Alrighty, so like I said, this was the most disturbing book I've ever read, and one of the only books I've ever read that has moved me to tears. Okay, and there's a reason for that, and it's that this was pretty horrifying, right? When you hear the description of a person being trapped within their own body, you almost immediately get claustrophobic, right? Your body is this vessel that you move around in, and the author does a fantastic job of putting you as the reader in this guy's situation, because the perspective kind of bounces around between first and third person. And you almost feel this sense of tightness as you're reading the story, and you're immersed in each and every time he wakes up to discover that some other part of him is missing. And the thing that got me, right, okay, so it's each sense that he realizes that he's lost, or each ability that he realizes that he's lost, he is sort of like having a flashback, and it doesn't drown you with the flashbacks, it really doesn't, but he'll be having a flashback of a time where he remembered doing something, and he goes to embrace his lover for a hug, and then realizes he can't because he doesn't have arms. And as the story progresses, ultimately, he has to overcome this challenge of just being in the hospital and unable to communicate. And he starts to learn, and this is really the driving focus of the story, which makes it very compelling, is that he doesn't just lay there as a vegetable, right? He's still got like this spirit, and he wants to live life. And he does so by trying to win these little victories. So he's in the hospital, he can't hear, he can't see, but he can feel, right? And he tries to win back his sense of time. And he tries to win back his sense of time by feeling the changing temperature of the room, or counting the nurse's footsteps as she comes in to change his bed sheets, and sort of gets this sense of time. And then later in the book, and this is the part that got me, emotional, was not that he's just trapped in his own body, but he remembers Morse code. And he has this epiphany about trying to communicate. And he latches onto this idea. He forgets about time. And he just so desperately wants to communicate. And there was something about that this sort of struggle of how lonely that would be, to be this guy who's being fed through a tube and just no way to communicate with the outside world. And the part that broke me was that in his efforts to communicate, he's not successful at first, right? He's trying to tap on his bed with just his head to give this nurse the message that, hey, there's a person in here. And like I said, he fails at first many times. And then even when he does, the level of communication that he has with the outside world doesn't quite meet his expectations. And yeah, it got me. It made me cry. And, I'm not anti-cry all the time, for the record. I cry in the car. I cried at my brother's wedding. Yeah, I cry a lot. I'm not anti-cry. I enjoy a good cry. But I just had yet to read a piece of fiction that has moved me to tears because it was just that moving. And also I read a lot of pieces that aren't necessarily meant to be emotional. So, without spoiling the book, that's kind of what it's about, and that's the main character's struggle in a nutshell. And of course, we get some of his backstory as well, and his experiences and his history, and that really makes this character three-dimensional. So you care for him, and he's very relatable. And it was deep, and it hurts. This one stung more than any book I've ever read, probably. So I'll speak a little bit about this one on a personal level, because usually when I do these book analyses, I do somewhat of a deep dive on the history, and there's some cool trivial information about this one. I found it through Metallica Song 1, and they actually own the rights to the movie version, and that's all cool and all. But more so than any other book that I've read, this one really got me to do a little bit of introspective kind of stuff, and it really got me to reflect as my own time in the military. And I don't want to bore you with that, because I didn't do anything crazy while I was in the Navy. I did my time, and I will say this, though. When I enlisted, I had expectations of experiencing basically what was in the commercial, right? I wanted to get on a ship. I wanted to go out and do all this gung-ho shit. And I worked hard, don't get me wrong. And it was a tough job. But I didn't do any of the adventurous stuff. I didn't go on any deployments, didn't see any combat. And it wasn't even for lack of effort, which is the funny part, is I signed up for 2 deployments, and other people got picked for them while I was on shore rotation. I picked orders for ship, when I was up for PCS, and they ended up sending me from Beaufort to Charleston, which is a 90-minute drive. Couldn't figure out why. Nothing wrong with me. I signed up for the billets that I wanted, which were, sea rotation billets, and I just didn't get them. And at the time, I was really disappointed, because I didn't enlist in the military to just basically sit there and have an office job. That wasn't what I wanted out of it. But even though at the time I was incredibly disappointed, and still am, like, I wanted to see the world and do all, I was watching a lot of Star Trek, and I wanted to go out on a ship and live that life, right? Like, that's what I sought, and that's why I joined. And nothing about patriotism. I didn't join because I was a patriot. I wanted to live life and go on a cool adventure before I turned 25. And like I said, it didn't happen that way. I worked hard, but whatever. But as I sort of got older, towards the end of my enlistment, had 2 kids and a wife, and my brain started to work a little bit differently than when I was a young man. Now, the character in this book was drafted. Okay, he didn't have a choice. But he does display some of that machoism and some of that, thrill-seeking behavior. And I have to say, towards the end, as I got a little bit older, around, I think I was like 23 or so at the time, I started kind of to forget about all the thrill-seeking stuff. There's something about having kids that's just like, I perceive danger a little bit differently. And my desire to participate in thrill-seeking activities greatly diminished. Then there's a few other things that happened while I was in. Like they would bring in these guys to speak to us, and they were all combat vets, and the one guy didn't have any legs. And you can kind of, and even though he's there to motivate you and get you to dig in deep and find your inner warrior or some bullshit like that, and I started to kind of make that connection, like, there's something about having legs that's kind of nice. And thank that man, thank that veteran for making that sacrifice and all that stuff, sure. But on the inside, like I said, I'm a little bit older now. I got 2 kids and a wife, and my goals became a little bit more family-oriented. Like, I want my kids to have a father, ultimately, is what I decided. And it didn't make much difference because I would have had to get it out anyway for higher tenure, but still, my desire to do a dangerous job greatly diminished. I don't worry about the glory anymore. I just want to be able to come home and see my kids. That's all I want. And that's I don't know. So reading this book and thinking about what could have been this alternate reality that I could have lived in. I served during a relatively peacetime era, which is great. But still, there's this alternate reality where I could have went in that I signed up for some deployment or something, and something happened to me. And I think about that, even though I didn't get the experience I want, I am fully intact, and I appreciate every day of life that I get to live without that damage or those battle scars, in all honesty. As an older man, that means nothing to me now that I didn't get to test my mantle. Alright, so the next phase of this video is to talk about whether or not this is a successful piece of anti-war literature. And I would say that it is, in a very profound way. In a non-political way, despite the author's political leanings, you don't experience that here, right? Like, it's from the book. At no point I'm like, you dirty communist. It never popped into my mind until after I read it, about what his political beliefs were. And more so than any other thing I can think of, absolutely, this is a successful piece of anti-war literature. And it would become later on very influential to, like the hippie movement and stuff, and, because of the Vietnam situation. And I would say if there's any group of veterans that could relate to this piece, it would be the Vietnam era people. And it's the guy who wrote the introduction to this book, was the guy who wrote Born on the 4th of July and stuff. And there's this thing about war, right, where in this book does a great job of illustrating the fact that war happens. It's going on. But you as the individual, right, your life has value despite whatever great cause your nation is fighting for. And I say great cause in quotations because show me one great cause that's more valuable than your life, right? And some people can, and they do. Like, I would die for my kids and things like that. But as you get older, and maybe this is why it's the younger men that are sent to war, because they're, still full of testosterone, and they haven't found anything worth living for yet. Or at least they think they haven't. But when you're older, you start to calculate these things a little bit different. And you start to value life in a different way because it's fragile. It is not infinite. It is finite. And to lose your life is the greatest thing on earth that you could lose. It's you, your entire essence. And to put young men in a situation where they have no choice in that matter, um, for a cause they don't even know about. I mean, you're talking about 18-year-old kids here going off to fight in a war that they don't even truly understand on any level. They think they do, I'm a patriot, whatever. And by the way, most of that rhetoric when you're in the military is pretty scarce. A lot of the guys join up for reasons that have very little to do with their sense of patriotism. Some, but it's more uncommon than I would have thought. But with that being said, it's your level of understanding. It's manipulative, right? You were manipulating young men into going into a situation where they might lose some physical part of them or their life. So yes, absolutely, this book is an effective piece of anti-war literature. And it does so by paying greater respect to the veteran as an individual than the government ever could with any memorial. In fact, there's a very important scene in the book where they come in and they pin a medal on Joe. And he can tell that's what's going on because he can feel their footsteps and he can feel the vibrations in the room. And he's like, my God, they just put a fucking medal on my chest. And it made him so mad. And I honestly, felt like that was the most true shit I've ever read. It's just like, dude's got no legs. And these dudes walk in the room and have the audacity to pin a medal on him, I mean, he's got less than no legs. He's got no arms. He's got no face, and they put a medal on him, which is great. Yeah, sure, give me a medal, but I like to be able to wipe my ass too, and if I could do it with your medal, I would. So yeah, this one just cut deep, and it just really gets you thinking about not just anti-war, but I mean the value of life in general, right? How fragile it is. Life does not go on forever, and to be robbed of your opportunity to live life for a cause that you know nothing about it's a deep idea. It's a deep concept, and more so than any other anti-war thing I've seen, this is the most valid argument against it that I am aware of at this time. If you got another one for me, throw it my way. I'll be happy to check it out. And I do read, some war stuff. It's like war stuff is cool because it's entertaining. But when it comes down to the reality of it, it's not. So that's my piece on that. This one got a little personal, went on a little long. But if you've read this one, feel free to comment and tell me your feelings on it. Was the author just communist scum, or was he really onto something here? You be the judge of that and let me know how you feel. Alrighty, guys, it's been Robostoph. See that I did that?